Hi, everybody. Welcome to The Right Side with Doug Billings. We have tonight again with us Michael Johns, the founder of the Tea Party movement in America, the spokesperson for that movement, former speechwriter for George W. Bush. He's written for just a plethora of conservative publications, the Wall Street Journal, Christian Science Monitor. He's a conservative political commentator, and he is with us right here again on The Right Side. Michael, we appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Pleasure, Doug. Good to be with you again.
We want to just get your opinion, Michael. We've had a great couple of days from the Republican National Convention, and my opinion is that it's just night and day versus what we saw last week from the Democratic side. I want to get your opinion on the fact that, in my view, the Republican Party has given us a glimpse of hope, light, the achievement of wonder, joy, and meaning in our lives. We have lots of firsts. We have citizens being, sworn in as citizens of the country. We have, we have President Trump making appearances every night. I think that the pardon of John Parson was, that incredible story of that man who founded the prison reform, the Hope for Prisoners organization in Las Vegas. That was, for a guy like me who's Irish and can often get weepy watching McDonald's Christmas commercials, that was a powerful night last night. What did you think?
I agree, and I do think most importantly, you see two completely contrasting visions that may reflect the underlying ideologies of both of these parties and both of these nominees. The 4 days in Democrat convention were just incredibly toxic. A lot of name calling. I thought it was almost unbecoming of a major national political party. Not that you would expect all of that to be, completely missing, but there really was nothing else. There was no sort of extension of hope or promise, and they really kept they concealed the 2 most significant things that I think would have been helpful to them. One was, as much as I oppose all of their policy agendas, to at least begin explaining why raising $4 trillion of taxes on the American people, why not having a policy on the border, why getting us back into the Iran agreement, why these would be good things for the security and prosperity of the American people.
Yeah.
They didn't do any of that, and I think beneath all of that was a recognition that they realized these policies are ones that they adhere to kind of coddle their far left political influence sources and their the far left donors, but they're not ones the American people identify with. And the other thing was missing was Biden himself. I mean, usually in a major convention like this, and particularly if you're challenging a president, you're going to want to highlight a lot of the accomplishments and even some of the sort of personal attributes of the nominee. Here's a guy who's had 47 years in Joe Biden inside the swamp. He's had a lot of votes he's taken, a lot of debates he's participated in, a lot of things he's said and done in 8 years as vice president, obviously. And you almost saw no example that they could pull out of anything he had said or done in nearly half a century of high-level government public service that would bring the American people to sort of think he was either capable or deserving of the highest office in the nation and in the world. And look, I mean, our convention, we have to take the gloves off with the Democrats on a few issues. And I saw some that said the first night it was a little aggressive on that, but you can't ignore what's going on in the streets. I mean, by the way, that was another thing frustrating with the Democrat convention is they had an option, in my view. They could have come out and condemned it. That would have been really, I think that would have won them a lot of support with moderates and with centrists. Right. And say, hey, look, maybe we're even with you on some of the objectives of law enforcement reform and things like that, but we're not with you in burning down buildings. Please stop it and shooting people. They didn't have the responsibility and decency to do that. Conversely, they could have come out and supported it and said, look, these are trying time. And I don't know what argument you would formulate. And of course, I would have found that wholly irresponsible. But, it would have been at least a little bit intellectually sincere, because I do think that's where they're at with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why they didn't condemn it. And obviously, all these cities where these things are transpiring are being managed by Democrat mayors and have been for a long time.
Right.
So you get to the Republican convention, and I just think this is a story. This is like there's been almost two phases of this presidency so far. I mean, you had the first 3 years which despite all of the resistance, the impeachment effort, the Russia investigation, all the resist movement in Congress, unwillingness of Pelosi and Schumer to really deal sincerely with the president, accomplished extraordinary things. The biggest tax reform and tax cuts in modern history, great jobs, over 7 million jobs that were created, wages starting to rise for the first time in really since the turn of the century. The country out of some of these illogical international entanglements and agreements that made no sense. The border at least being started to take seriously, and despite the fact that Congress has not made it easy on him with the funding of that, and middle class, I think, being strengthened.
You're right. Yeah. Michael, I think you're right. For me, it took Melania Trump to say, hey, stop, take a step back. Let's stop the violence. Let's stop the mob. Let's just take a step back. I think that by virtue of their silence, to your point, the New Democratic Socialist Party has blessed the mob. I think they view the mob as part of their electoral base. And I think the mob and the anarchy and the chaos that we see on the news every day and every night is one of the best. And although President Trump can create some really awesome commercials, the mob is one of the best commercials for the re-election of President Trump. I think all of us with common sense look at that and go, good God, not one Democratic leader has spoken out against it. And if President Trump, I might not like his personality or the way that he tweets, but if he's the one that stands between us and the mob, by golly, I'm going to vote for him.
Yeah, none of them have spoken out against it until it's actually threatened their own houses and their own families.
Yeah.
And they actually have. Then apparently it is threatening. As long as it's just hurting routine people in the streets, it's not at all problematic. I think that's an interesting thesis. I think it's an interesting thesis. I'm inclined to agree with you, though I think it's yet to be told. And that is the biggest political question is that I think there's two parts of this question. Number one is, are the American people going to remember and give credit to President Trump for the first 3 years of extraordinary accomplishment where, you had all these jobs being created, the economy finally, after a decade, moving in the best direction, lowest unemployment for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans in the history of the country. Literally at one point, more job openings than there were people to fill them. A lot of the foreign investment money beginning to come back because he cut the corporate rate from 35 down to 21%, made us competitive in the world again. Are they going to remember all that, or is this going to be a present tense? This is all about the current moment. We have riots in the streets, and we have a pandemic that I think a lot of us sort of guessed was going to begin to improve over the summer and hasn't. So I think he can win either way, or if it's a hybrid of it. I believe if this turns out to be about the present tense, the argument's going to have to be, look, this is the China virus. This is the Wuhan virus. This virus was manufactured in China. It was consciously allowed to be released from China in what essentially was an act of war on the United States and the global economy in ways that this regime that's defining itself in fundamentally evil ways lately must see as advantageous.
Yep.
I put the travel ban in on January 31. My opponent called it racist and xenophobic. It wouldn't have allowed the infected to continue to arrive in the United States.
Yep.
And you start with that fact, which to me, I think that's just an overwhelmingly persuasive. It was a bold act by President Trump, and it really does show the respective judgment. I just don't think Biden really can have much credibility on the pandemic when you oppose the travel ban, which was kind of like the one global thing.
No, I'm right with you. And I think that Americans will and do remember it. I think that there's far more many Americans who have common sense about this whole thing, and about, every time a Democrat gets up and says it's the wrecked economy that we're living right now is because it's President Trump's fault. I mean, that's just rubbish. It's intellectually immature, and I think most Americans get that. It's the kooky mandates and shutdowns that the Democratic Party has put in place that has wrecked the economy. We can, the COVID virus, we don't want to take it lightly, but I mean, it's got a statistical 100% survival rate unless you're medically fragile. So I think Americans get that. We get the fact that there's no case on the planet where a school-aged kid.
I thought some of these polls would show, I consciously did not, as you can imagine, I was approached all over the country to participate, help lead the reopen campaigns back in early spring. And I thought it was premature, and it was instinctual, and it was based on me, judging some of the data and still honestly not knowing as much about this virus as this is a very complicated virus. I mean, it's almost certainly it has an animal to human transmission, which itself is very unusual. Its presentation is very unusual. The way it acts within the human body is unpredictable. As you say, it's immensely life-threatening to some in risk categories, and not at all threatening to, for the most part, to younger people, which I think is a persuasive argument for opening the schools in the fall, which the CDC has recommended, which the Academy of Pediatricians has recommended. I mean, anyone who's looked at this has said that should be done.
Yeah.
But what I haven't seen is the anger at China that I would have anticipated, nor have I seen these polls. I mean, the American people I'm going to be honest, they're afraid and they're concerned. And I think there's a certain element of unknown to all of this, because it's not like there's no benchmark to judge it against. And the messaging on this really has to be, I think, both clinically solid from the standpoint of the public health, and showing that this administration, which I know it has developed great understanding of what can and should be done in these cases. Because you look at the progress, I mentioned the travel ban, but the mass mobilization. Remember back in February and March, everyone thought we were going to run out of ventilators. This was going to be a huge crisis. I'm not aware of one American who died for lack of ventilator.
Right.
You look at there was all this issue of hospital overflow. Remember when President Trump actually mobilized military assets to New York Harbor and in Southern California to provide relief to acute care facilities. They ended up, to be honest with you, not even really being that needed. You had Newsom and Cuomo both said they were necessary. He did it, but there was again bad judgment by two Democrat governors.
Yeah.
And then obviously like the therapeutics, there was a lot of pushback institutionally on this, which I think is perplexing the American people, about hydrochloroquine and why, given its 50-year history of documented off-label use, it would not be suitable in these cases. I honestly, even when I hear the arguments against it, they're not adding up to me. And I speak as someone who worked 20 years in healthcare management.
Right. Yep. No, you and I you have a similar background in that. We both were. And when COVID hit, I was in healthcare. We never once saw a hospital overrun. We had 3 of them in New York. And it's, I interrupted you.
This therapy, I mean, it's broadly used in rheumatology conditions. Its primary use was in malaria. It's been highly used for a long time. This is not like
and other things.
The risk drugs that you have to be, whose risk you really need to be concerned about, are ones that are newer, that don't have the documented long-term statistical data. So this is I mean, I'm looking at this more as an analyst now than as an obvious proponent who couldn't be more enthusiastic about President Trump. I'm just saying the question that I think emerges is, are the American people, if they're going to assign blame on the pandemic which frankly could have been a lot worse. It's tough to imagine, but it could have been. Are they going to point to Beijing, or are they going to point to the administration? Because it would be a total mistake to be pointing at this administration, which worked 24/7, in every conceivable way. And then on the street violence, I think the same story is you and I, looking at it logically, obviously identify that these are riots that are being permitted by Democrat mayors, that there's a complete overt political dimension to them. It's designed to create in the minds of most Americans a sense of, look, just everything's gone wrong. Well, we have two serious things that have gone wrong, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that two enemies of this president pulled their best punches, and with releasing the pandemic from China with Chinese Communist Party, and the mass amount of financial resources is backing these Democrat mayors and has Marxist orientation and presenting street disruption, knowing that the president was limited with federalism to involve any federal military assets, trying to quell them.
No, I think that's a powerful statement, Michael. I think you're spot on. I think
such a shame. I mean, I look at this and I say, this president, I don't know how broadly this, I think Trump supporters feel this way, but it's like you look and you almost feel sorry for what's been inflicted on him, because he's had the best intentions. He's tried to do the best things. And like literally, they spied on his campaign. They lied to FISA courts to get warrants that were not justified legally. They violated, in my judgment, clearly a whole bunch of different laws at high levels because he presented a threat to the swamp. They launched a Ukraine impeachment effort that was completely baseless, utterly baseless, and was deemed as such by the U.S. Senate, fortunately. And they haven't cooperated with them. I can remember being down in Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day. I mean, that city was on fire. There was a car fire down the street from where I was doing a television interview, and the next day they had Madonna calling to burn down the White House. The anger and the violence was there right from the beginning. And it's really sad, because the precise constituencies that they have attempted to involve in this resistance have been the biggest beneficiaries of this president's policies.
I agree.
I argued last night, and Democrats scoff at this, of course. The Democrat, the strategists do. But I said, on what basis would an African American vote for Joe Biden? I mean, that just seems inconceivable to me. I mean, this was the guy behind the '90s crime bill, incarcerated unbelievable numbers of African Americans. In the three strike law, put people in jail for terms that were probably exceeding the nature of those crimes in a lot of cases. And then you on President Trump's side, the first major criminal justice reform in modern times, the lowest African American unemployment in the history of the country, and we forget the funding of the traditionally Black colleges and universities. By the way, Obama could have done any one of those things. He didn't do any of them. And African Americans left after 8 years of Obama's administration, after all the hope and change rhetoric. They left with a country that had millions more on food stamps, millions more dependent at the poverty level, and the largest number of Americans not in the labor force in decades.
I agree with you. I think that there's 1,000 untold stories out there. We saw a few of them at the Republican convention over the last couple of days. There's Jason Joyce, the lobster fisherman from Maine, who last night got on there and talked about, for the first time ever, lobsters don't have any tariffs on them if we're going to ship them and sell them to Europe. That doesn't get any news. But there's people like that. We heard from dairy farmers. We heard from people from the steel mills that were closed, and now under Trump, they're reopening. I think that there's and I know that as the analyst in you might not, you might have to go, wait a minute, is that really true? I'm not sure I buy into that. I just think as a citizen, I just think there's
it matters a lot. These are the forgotten men and women that the president has spoken about, that have worked in these industries that don't get a lot of public scrutiny. and who have been immensely harmed over the last few decades by globalist policies that have not had their back, and a complete disregard of their stability, of their job stability and their wages and their struggles.
What do you think? Our schedules are so busy. I know yours is very busy. We might not be able to see you tomorrow, but if you were to give us your insight about tonight, what do you think night 3 will bring? I know we've got the vice president and others coming up, his wife and so forth. And then tomorrow with President Trump, what can we expect from him?
Well, I mean, we're going right at them. I mean, the vice president will speak from Fort McHenry in Baltimore, in Maryland, where the lyrics were written for the Star Spangled Banner. And I think, we're kind of doubled down on this American patriotism, on a bright and optimistic future, on the fact that there's no country like the United States of America. Mm-hmm. And I think when you get to the Trump messaging tomorrow night, I really think when I describe this either or approach to how you do it, you can't ignore the present tense. So he's going to have to speak forcefully and boldly about and will, I'm sure, about both of these issues, go through the litany of steps that have been taken to contain the damage of this pandemic. And even though it's taken going on 200,000 lives, you can remember months ago, there was conjecture that this was going to be a 7-figure pandemic. And, we've lost jobs because, there's been a very protective measure. I think he's able to say with a straight face that not one American has died because of a lack of effort or ingenuity by the federal government. I mean, there really hasn't been mistakes made in this, because trust me, they've been all over him looking for them, trying to highlight things that they thought were mistakes. And Biden's leadership on it, I mean, it's been laughable. I mean, he's literally come out for things like days and weeks after the president has. He has no plan on it. So that's that. He's going to have to address the street riots, I think, with reminding that the criminal justice reform. He took that up as the first president to do it. That he, it supports law enforcement in this country, but also recognizes that there are community challenges. I don't think you want to challenge the narrative that the untrue narrative that being killed, that as an unarmed African American, that being killed by law enforcement is anywhere of a threat. It's simply not factually, statistically untrue. Right. There were 375 million encounters with law enforcement last year, and I think there were less than 10 African Americans who were unarmed that were killed.
9.
So statistically, it is simply not an issue. It is for those 9 cases, but even those 9 cases have individual stories behind them.
Right.
Well, even the Louisville case that's being highlighted, where they want the charges to be brought. I mean, just think about it. Law enforcement serves a warrant in a drug case, and the boyfriend of the woman whose I guess home it was, opens fire on the police, and they fire back, and you get a fatality there. But it's not simply like they went in there and started shooting people, and no law enforcement officer, believe me, I mean, they feel horrible about stuff like that. Fortunately, it's not a common occurrence.
Yeah, they do.
I think he's got to rally the country too.
I do too. Well, I have one just an observation about what you said about the present tense of Biden versus Trump. I think over, as I juxtapose last week against this week, I like what you've said. I agree with it. I think that Trump is the present tense candidate. He's there. He's there every night. He's made appearances. We've had a 2 days of absolute firsts with regards to these conventions, things that he's done with regards to the pardon, the citizenship, and so forth. But Biden is not present tense. Biden's virtual, if anything. He's not there in person. He's not making any trips. He's in his basement. We're not sure if he even knows he's in his basement. So there's that. Just my observation on what you said with regards to present tense. The candidacy of Trump is definitely present, and it's with us, where Biden is not at all. And my final question to you, though, Michael, is
it's a hugely important and yet sensitive topic. 59% of the American people currently do not believe Joe Biden has a physical or mental capacity to be able to complete a 4-year term.
Yep.
There's a certain percentage of the American people who don't believe he has a physical or mental capacity to start a 4-year term.
Yes.
Even if he was elected, that he would like to back out before Inauguration Day.
Yeah, right.
So it's already established in the minds of a certain segment of the country that this is a big issue. And 59% is bigger than Trump's highest support number, which is 51%, which to me suggests you got some people who are inclined to vote for him who also simultaneously recognize these issues.
Sure.
And those were some, by the way, there were some encouraging statistics and polling that came out of the Democratic convention. I mean, you did not, for one thing, 2% more Americans at the end of that convention considered themselves Republican than did back in June. I thought that was intriguing. It's a small move at the number, but not so small when you consider it's only a few months.
Yep.
And the enthusiasm gap between Trump and Biden, meaning those who say they're going to vote for one or the other, and they're asked what their level of enthusiasm was already as high as 20 points, and it grew even further after that Democrat convention. So I think you got to, by most measures, I think you have to look. The Democrats put on their best show in this situation, and it didn't resonate with the American people. Support has not gone up. It didn't move the primary polls. But that, I mean, the national polls, and underlying this biggest issue of enthusiasm, these people who say they support Biden, it's under 40% who say they support him because of him. Right. These are protest votes. And that's where I think the opportunity exists, because I think the protest votes are about this current situation in the country and the obvious economic and public health toll that's been enacted. I think that's one big opportunity for the president, is that if he can demonstrate some degree of empathy and sympathy for those who've been negatively affected by it, which breaks from his historical, sort of more aggressive side, I think the American people would really react positively to that. Right. And it would resolve, some of the messaging challenge. And other than that, I mean, he's got 3 years, a great story to tell, and he's running against, I think, the weakest presidential candidate probably. Well, what do you think? Since 72 or
70? Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, Carter and Dukakis. It's
Dukakis getting in the tank, or you go back
the tank. The tank garb. Yeah, he looked great. Mr. Magoo going to war. So, Michael, so the last question. I mean, I think that what we're seeing in not even subtle ways over the last couple of days is a rebranding of the Republican Party. I want to get your opinion on this. I think that the Republican Party is positioning themselves and rebranding themselves to be the party of the working class, men and women across the country. We see this with the stories that we've heard. I think that it's the party of women. We saw the story with Trump hiring more women than any president in history. The party of minorities, the party of every demographic. I think that, and I know that you worked for George H.W. Bush and the Bush family. I think that we're branding away from the party of John McCain, George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, and clearly away from the likes of the catastrophe that's Mitt Romney. So I think that we're rebranding. I think we're remessaging.
I totally agree with that. And not only do I agree with it, but I endorsed President Trump day one, June 16th, 2015. Precisely because I saw the Republican Party was wayward on some of these key issues that matter, like the border, like these even legal immigration, which is totally illogically structured, needs to be overhauled, and like these trade pacts. I grew up in the Lehigh Valley area of Pennsylvania, and watching Bethlehem Steel, the second largest production facility of steel in this country be decimated by foreign competition that was totally preventable, and wasn't, because it was part of a systematic approach toward American manufacturing that kind of concluded that was not our future. There's even a name to it. It's called managed decline. You never hear about this phrase outside of the Beltway, but within federal government, individuals in both parties have operated under a thesis of managed decline, and managed decline is one that basically we have to get to a point of recognizing the inevitability of China's leadership in manufacturing and in global leadership, and we have to kind of like assume our role. I think the American people understood that President Trump arrived also understanding that and totally fighting against it. The enthusiasm for him would be even higher, but that is what we're up against. And the times have changed too. I said, look, Trump is the leader for this moment. Would he have been the leader? He probably would have been good as we navigated the beginning of these major trade deficits too. I think we'd be a stronger country if he'd been in position. But I have immense enthusiasm for what he can do, and it is essential that he win this November election, and that hopefully Republicans take the Congress.
Amen. I agree. Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, Doug Billings on the right side. We've been speaking with Michael Johns again on the program. We're grateful for his time. We promised him a 15-minute deal, and now it's 30 minutes. There's never a short conversation. There's so many things that we can talk about, Michael. And listen, we on the right side, I can't thank you enough for, again, taking time. Your opinion, your insights, and just your analysis of what's going on today is so important for the country to hear. And if we in some way can help get that out, we're happy to do it. And thanks, Michael, for your time.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks for all you're doing.
We appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Please make sure you subscribe to us on all of the podcast platforms in the country. We're on all of them, and we're happy to have Michael John with us again tonight. May God continue to bless you, ladies and gentlemen, and may He continue to guide and bless the United States. Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, hi, Doug Billings here on the right side. It's not every day that we here at the program get to meet someone who rubs elbows with American heroes. But we've done just that, and he's become a friend of the program, and we're grateful for it. The Commander's Artist, otherwise known on Twitter as The Real Mad Dog 58. Make sure you look him up and give him a follow on Twitter at The Real Mad Dog 58. And more importantly, perhaps, look him up on the web, www.thecommandersartist.com. He's the personal artist of General Mike Flynn. Personal friend of the general's is a personal friend of mine, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm flattered that he's become a friend of the right side. You can check out his artwork just over my right shoulder, the right side logo that we use at the beginning and end of every program. There's one of me up there in my Revolutionary War garb, protecting the Republic from intellectual liberal immaturity, and one of Donald Trump up there as well. We love it. My chosen leader. TheCommandersArtist.com and The Real Mad Dog 58 on Twitter. Mad Dog, Commander's Artist, thank you, brother. Thank you for your friendship, for all you've done for the show. Cheers.